Caroline Miller, the host of Just Read It. This is a book review talk show where Oregon writers take a good look at the New York Times bestsellers. And today we're going to be discussing a nonfiction, a biographical work by the famous Walter Isaacson, master of this genre. And the book we're looking at is Codebreaker, which focuses on the life of Jennifer Doudna. Now, Doudna won the Nobel Prize in 2020 in biochemistry, sharing it with a cohort of hers, Emmanuel Charpentier. And the subject is CRISPRs, or gene editing, which is, dare I say, as a literary person, the science of cutting viral genes to make defense mechanisms of predators. Well, I probably mashed that, but that's my best shot. And with me today are two writers, among other things, Francis Ippolito and Botum Chhay. And both of them are writers. So let me start with you, Francis. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your writing ventures are?
Sure. So my day job is I'm actually a patent judge. And so my technical background is chemistry, mechanical, some electrical and CS. So when I was reading this book, it was actually very close to in the technology, a lot of the things I see normally. In fact, there's a mention in here of the work, some of the work that we do at where I have trials and such. But in the writing side, I do a lot of speculative fiction, but I write all across all genres, essays, poetry, children's, adults, more recently focusing on horror, so ghost stories of the Asian diaspora. And one of the books that has my stories in there is the Asian ghost short stories that's been put out by Flame Tree. Has translations of ancient stories, which is why I really like this book, because the culture of ghosts and ancestor worship is something that's very cultural. And so I think it's a good volume to have on your shelves.
Well, we'll make sure that people are reminded to buy it before the program ends. Now, Botum, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Caroline. My name is Botum Chhay, and I'm an attorney. That's my day job. I mostly do business law, and on the writing side, I'm actually just getting started, so I consider myself kind of a newbie. But I've been writing in earnest. I think the last few weeks, I've been kind of inspired. And right now, the project that I'm kind of working on is, my working title is A Modern Pandemic Odyssey, using philosophy to navigate life's adventures. And so I have two short stories now, and I'm just gonna work on writing a couple more stories and seeing what shakes out. But yeah, I feel like, it's been kind of a new passion of mine, and I'm just gonna go with the flow and see where it takes me.
So you've written 2 or 3 in a series that you want to do. Did I get you right?
Yes. I have 2 completed just very recently. My time has been kind of mostly, I've spent most of my time practicing law. And so I've recently been admitted to the Tennessee bar. And after that happened, a great weight, thank you. A great weight has lifted off of my shoulders. And as a result, I feel a lot more creative and just more free to do the things I want to do, like move on with my life.
So if you finish this anthology, will you try to publish them singly or in a complete volume?
I guess, like, if we're going to talk about the future like that, I would say probably as a complete volume. I mean, I think that's the dream, to have stories that have a common theme, to have some kind of tie to, I don't know, just, I feel like there's a lot going on. And in the world, there's a lot of change. And so I feel like that's something I want to kind of tap into, but also using philosophy, which, is a very, I feel like that's something that is underused, I think. I studied philosophy in college. And for me,
So did I.
oh,
I don't know how anybody lives without it.
That's absolutely right. I agree with that. I studied Western and Eastern philosophy, and it's been kind of, I would say, my superpower. And it's gotten me through a lot of different things. And when I speak about it, because a lot of people did not study philosophy, they seem very interested in it. And so I feel like this is maybe my way of sharing and spreading the gospel of philosophy.
Okay, well, I will, we don't want to convert everybody, but I will say this: when a man interviewed me for a job, he said, philosophy, what on earth are you supposed to do with that? And I said, well, think. Anyway, let's get on with the book, Codebreaker, with Jennifer Doudna's biography. Now, I'd like to get both of your responses on this. Walter Isaac is, a masterful biographer. So it started out with Doudna's life. Her dad lays a book of the double helix on her bed. She's enraptured. When she's a girl, she's enraptured with the biology story, and that seems to be a turning point in her life. And I was very interested in her, but somewhere midpoint, and Francis, this is something you can respond to perhaps. We get into the politics of science, and the shift then is in not so much on Doudna anymore, but on the competition among scientists, and particularly in this rush for patents. I wonder, did both of you feel that bifurcation, the kind of shift? I felt a little bit let down. I wanted to hear more about Doudna, but were you surprised by this patent competition, Francis?
No, not at all.
No.
I mean, no, not at all. I mean, I think that I always say to people when they ask about, well, what is all this patent stuff? Why copyrights and trademarks? And it's, what is that right? These intellectual property rights. And I always think of it as a very fortunate thing that it's built into our Constitution that we have these protections for basically these, and for patents, inventions that people can conceive and hopefully monetize. And of course, if you come out with something that is a blockbuster, a shift in basically the way that we consider our bodies, like how we function in nature, that's a really costly endeavor. And unless you have the backing of the research grants, the universities, like this doesn't happen usually in someone's garage, not the same way that some other types of inventions do. So I guess I wasn't surprised, because I could see that it was leading up to an ownership issue of who gets to use this. And some of that plays out even now when we think about vaccines and Pfizer and mRNA vaccines. Like that is also a factor as well. Companies pursue research because they hope to be able to make money at some point. I mean, there is the good, but it is a business. So
a lot of money goes out and some should come in. Fair enough.
It's part of the system.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tom, I wonder if you would pick up on Francis's comment that this technology, if I can call it that, this gene editing, as Francis says, was just positively, it's world shifting. Now you're a lawyer, so you can think craftily. What are some of the ramifications? What did you see as world shifting about this? Because a lot of moral issues come up. I mean, we're even talking about derived babies, designer babies. Can you talk a little bit about, as a philosopher, the moral issues that open and arise with this technology?
I can comment on that on a couple of different levels, actually. As a lawyer, I mean, the fighting over the patents, I mean, people fight all the time when there's like a lot of money. So that was not surprising for me at all, because I mean, we're lawyers. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we do. Right? That's unfortunately what we do. And it's actually a good thing, right? It's actually a good thing. It actually, I mean, that's what drives us towards innovation, right? So I feel like that's a good thing. And also I love not just the science aspect of it, but the business aspect. They talked about like the venture capital, you know, the private equity, all that kind of stuff. So I feel like it's not just science, it's a story about business, it's a story about the law. So I felt like it was actually great for me to pull all these things in, and which of course moves us to the philosophical aspects as well. You know, as I was reading this, I thought about the movie Gattaca. And then, of course, it came up, right, about designer babies. And it's actually pretty incredible. And I think this book touches upon it as well. Like, if we have this gene editing ability, wouldn't it in some ways create more inequity in the world, right? As in, folks with more resources will have the ability to, even above the resources they have, to give extra privileges to their children and their descendants. And so wouldn't that in some ways create a world of more just inequity? And I feel like that did touch upon it. I think that's actually probably one of the biggest, I feel like, maybe potential like harms, right? But potential good is, I really love the discussion on the sickle cell trial. I feel like that is so, I mean, important. That is something that affects mostly folks from of African descent, and it's so terrible. And I feel like if that is one thing that we can do in the world, is to help all people overcome this kind of disease, I think that would be great. But on a more, I guess, like on the equity side of things, I mean, I feel like throughout history, folks that have had more resources, we see that they have always tried to kind of, give them themselves. Like, I mean, I think about the royalty in Europe, right? Like, throughout history, they have interbred, right? And so what happened there in the end was that they did interbreed, and so they actually interbred out of existence in some ways, right? So I feel like, the thing about designer babies, there's a lot of kind of unknowns when we human beings try to give ourselves kind of an upper hand.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's, for me, like a philosophical and maybe like kind of a spiritual kind of question that they touch upon.
Are we ready for the spiritual questions? There was one gentleman in the book, a Chinese, who did create a couple of children who were edited for HIV, but went to prison because the society felt that there were other ways to deal with this problem. So he paid the price. So Francis, chip in here. What's your feeling on particularly on Botum's issue of the inequality that could emerge from this, as well as the human race taking control of its own evolution?
I feel like I've seen this story in like so many dystopian science fiction plots. I mean, haven't we seen like even Ender's Game, where the kids are bred to be these super intelligent military strategists who go off into space and commit like genocide of the entire alien race? Or Greg Bear's and Darwin's Radio, where there are some children who have a reaction to a virus that actually makes them superior in the next chain in the evolution. So I would say that this concept, the ethics of gene editing, and essentially, should we versus can we question, is one that we're going to grapple with a lot. But I also think that if the science is there, it might just be a matter of time before someone does it. It might be inevitable. that there might be an ends that somehow justifies the means for somebody, and it'll be done.
Well, I have two feelings on this because you guys are professionals. I'm just a wit. But I frankly was shocked. I don't know, I put scientists on a pedal and how human they were, and can we really trust them about what it is they're doing? On the other hand, I thought about the cloning experience where science and society came together and said, no, this is something we're not going to do. And we didn't do it, as far as I know, except for Dolly. But I'm always uncomfortable when the science arrives and society isn't ready for it. And this may be a case. So, Botum, are you lawyers working on this problem at all?
This is like outside of my day job. I usually, this is not outside. This is not my practice area. I usually do business law. But lawyers, we do run across like various moral questions. But I actually think this is more of a kind of a philosophical kind of question, really. I mean, there is the science. I feel like in some ways the science, like Francis says, like I think we can do it. And in the case of those two twins, someone did do it, but unfortunately he did a terrible job. He did edit, but it wasn't quite successful. But nonetheless, they still went ahead and implanted those children. And I actually was interested in seeing how, getting an update on those twins, how are they today? I cannot imagine that they are healthy individuals just based on, I'm not a scientist by, training or anything like that, but I did take a couple of science classes, right? And if they said, my understanding is it was not perfectly done. The gene editing there was not perfectly done. So I cannot imagine that those children are healthy. Just perhaps, the science is not there yet.
Okay.
And I thought that's what they were at. It can be, it probably will be, but with the twins, it wasn't there yet.
Well, now I think Doudna sensed that in the book and attempts to gather a group of people to arrive at consensus. Did you feel, Francis, that was a successful effort and something that should be done on a broader scale?
I think the conversation has to be continued. And I mean, definitely having those conversations are important, whether or not it's bioethicists or the scientists themselves. As I was reading this book, I thought about I think the other book that I've read was The Making of the Atomic Bomb, and sort of the race, right? All these scientists, they had a problem to solve. It was a puzzle. It was exciting to work with these brilliant minds. And then you solve the puzzle. And then that moment when you realize you solved the puzzle, you have this realization that you really maybe shouldn't have solved that puzzle, right? And so I think, but you really can't put it back in the box. It's right. It's science, it's technology, it's research. I'm sure at the time that all these scientists were trying to make these discoveries, a lot of it was driven by competition about, just motivated by solving these puzzles in hopes that there would be some use and practical good that could come from it. But sometimes I think that those ramifications politically, socially, it falls out because you're still just like, can we even do this? And then it's at the other side of it that you're going to have to really rely on policy, the public. You can't just give it all to the scientists, because in some ways, they can make the discovery, but they're not necessarily going to be the ones who use it.
Well, yes, because I just finished reading Rosalind Franklin's. There's a fictional biography where Francis, Crick and Watson stole her design and the machinations. So I see the parallels. As a layperson, my feeling about scientists is, well, they're human beings. And as you say, both of you, money is a motivator. So how do we address the problems that Walter Isaacson exposes in this book, particularly the second half of the book where he looks at this competition between scientists and the run for passion for patents? Are we exploring is it a little bit like climate change? Are we going to carry this to the end, that we destroy ourselves? Or did you have any kind of foreboding about that? Either one of you chip in.
Well, I did have a class in college that was called something like "Will Science Destroy Us?" And we read things in that class, like Silent Spring. We did watch Gattaca. We read some other books as well. And it's sort of like that. Is our future Star Trek or Terminator? Like, what is our future, right? And I tend to be hopeful that, because I am somebody who has a training in science, but also training in other areas as well, is that it's really important, I think, for us to play out these scenarios in art. So let's see what happens in a story. Let's see what happens in a movie if we go there. And that way we can play with these concepts. And hopefully we have the stories with the good endings too. And that way we can see those possibilities, because there's a lot of fear about what could happen, but there's also potential good. And I think if we as a whole, as consumers and as a public, focus on some of those good purposes and those good stories, and also see the dystopian negative possibilities, we're better prepared for the actual test. All that's like.
All right. Botum, do you agree with Francis? Is, as I've always known, art the answer?
Well, I think art is very, very important, right? Like, I feel like, just based upon my own kind of, background, right? Like, my parents they're from Cambodia, and so they escaped communism. And in communism, in that the society they had escaped from, they banned everything good, like especially art, right? And they targeted,
especially art. You're right.
Especially art, right? Especially art, like especially
artists.
Didn't scientists, doctors, teachers, you know what I mean? Like, so here's the thing. Like, I feel like art is very, very important, and I don't think that. I feel like science does way more good than bad in the world, for sure, right? That's what we always have to, that's what I think there's always potential for like a very bad outcome. But I feel like that's true about anything, right? Like, and I say this as someone who studied philosophy. Like, you see like totalitarian regimes, like, what is the seed of that? Ideas, philosophy. Like, it's not science, like it's like some kind of madman, and there's this perfect storm, you know what I mean? So I feel like a lot of things, there's potential for a terrible, terrible outcome, but a lot of things also, there's a potential outcome for amazing things beyond, that we like, that can lift all of us up, right? Make the world a better place. And I feel like that's maybe the philosophy major in me, like, maybe this can actually help us, I don't know,
we're going to have to be far more aware, because as you know, Plato threw the artists out of the Republic as destructive forces. So I don't know. I'm old. I'll be gone. I leave it to you youngsters. Well, we've had a delightful discussion here. Boy, if anybody doesn't rush out and buy Isaacson's book, they're missing out on something. Now, we must bring it to a close, so I will ask you, each of you, to tell me, would you recommend the book? This is kind of a no-brainer, but Botum, since the camera's on you, what would you recommend this book? Botum, would you recommend?
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely. You know what I mean? I feel like there's something in everything, there's something of everything for anyone, I think. There's folks, if they like just biography, like, I feel like this is a great kind of story that tells of a woman. She wins the Nobel
You
Prize.
touch the female aspect, right?
It's incredible. Like, it's an incredible story. I mean, my understanding is there were only 5 winners of the Nobel Prize who are women out of like 180. So I feel like that's a fantastic kind of human story. If you love science, you like philosophy, you like the law, you like business. I mean, I feel like for me, it touches on a lot of things that I love.
Okay, that's
Art, you know what I mean? So yeah, I would say yes. I would
all
recommend.
right. That's a big thumbs up. And Francis, how about you?
So I'd say that if you're writing, you should always be reading across genres, so nonfiction and science included, because that'll provide the basis for storytelling. And I think just in general, as a citizen of the world, you should be aware of these discoveries and changes in just how we view what we can do as humans, because you should have that knowledge and not be surprised by it when it shows up at your drugstore.
Well said, and undoubtedly it will. Okay. Excellent. We could have gone on forever, but Francis, before we say goodbye, would you tell our audience again the publication that you're in and the stories? Do the stories have names? I'm sure they do.
They do. So this is Asian Ghost Stories. It's by Flame Tree. You can get it through Simon & Schuster. And my story is Qian, which is a Asian version of the Ouija board. So
Okay.
it's a story about what happens when the Ouija board is played with.
Well, listen, after talking to you two, I want to read everything you write, both of you. Botum, remind us what you're up to, even though there's nothing quite yet we can buy.
Well, my dream is to write a work of philosophy that can speak to your average person, because I feel like more philosophy in the world, it doesn't hurt. It always helps when we're all thinking and trying to be better human beings.
You have a soulmate in me on that. All right. All right, ladies, thanks so much for this absolutely delightful discussion of what might on the surface sound like a dull book, biogenetics. Audience, don't be fooled. It's great reading. Isaacson is a masterful writer. He could write about toilet paper and I'd read it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank my guests, Francis and Botum, for being with me. And I want to thank my audience for being with me, because we've had quite a lively discussion. Come back, please, or even sign up. We don't sell ads or anything, but we only publish every 2 months. So you don't want to miss out on this kind of conversation, do you? Till next time, this is Caroline Miller, host of Just Read It.